So this is the last of our CloudShare support sessions for this term and this year, and we're I guess hoping to do these again next year. We'll focus today on Google Forms, and Matt's got some fantastic I guess tricks of the trade that he'll be sharing with us a little later on how he uses Google Forms in the classroom. So this presentation that we're doing is available at that internet address. You may want to write that down because we're going to move off that slide in a moment. We'll start, I guess we want to split the session up today up into, I guess, a kind of a 1/3, 2/3, where we'll talk firstly about some of the new features of Google Forms, and I'll talk briefly about that, and then we'll get into the meat. As I was saying to Matt, I think I'm the entree and Matt's the main meal for this presentation. So we'll go through some of those new features, and then we'll move on to the main, I guess, agenda for today, which is to look at using forms in education. And Matt's got some really clever ways and some really useful ways of using Google Forms. So we'll start with a very common gotcha. So I know, Alma, you'll be aware of this one, and I'm not sure, Mike and Phyllis, whether you guys are aware of this, but this is a really common problem that we see. In fact, Matt saw this just today with another email about someone who had created a form, and of course they create it with their own account in the staff domain, and they try and share that with their students, but they don't uncheck those two boxes at the top, and so that means that the students can't actually access the form. So it's a common problem, and one that's very easily solved. You simply just don't check those top two boxes, which means that it won't require a student to sign in as a staff member, which obviously they can't do. So the solution is to uncheck the boxes, and if you're trying to collect student names, then just do that with the question in the form. The alternative, if you really do want to collect student email addresses, is to create the form using a generic account in the student domain, because then the form will exist in the student domain itself. So that's a very common gotcha. And of course, if you get stuck on something like that, you can always contact us here at CEO, and we'll try and point you in the right direction. So the other thing that we noticed that's different in the new Google Forms, so Google refreshed Google Forms, 2 or 3 months ago now? Probably around 2 or 3 months ago. And one of the things that we noticed was that there's a big blue send form button where you would normally expect to see a share button. And so what sometimes happens is that people click send form thinking that they're sharing the editable form with collaborators. Well, you're not actually doing that. When you click that send form button, you're actually sending the question sheet, the form itself, to users so that they can complete the form. You're not actually sharing the form with collaborators. So you can click send form and send it via email addresses. And so you can see that send form button in the top right hand corner. If you click the send form button, so we'll do that now, you'll see that you get to add collaborators, sorry, not add collaborators, you get to email people who want to fill in the form. And you can put in email addresses. You can also put in group email addresses if you want to, and send those off to people. So just the thing to remember is that this is the live form that people complete that is going to go out to those people that you email. Just to quickly, Matt will quickly show you what we're talking about here. That's this form, the thing that actually gets completed. So when you hit send form, that's what happens. Right, back to the presentation. Of course, if you want to actually add collaborators, that is, have people co-edit the form with you, then you can use the Add Collaborators menu under the file, and you just share the form as you would any other Google Doc. The other thing that we wanted to put a plug in for here is if you're thinking about adding collaborators, or even doing things like sending forms to group email addresses, then Teacher Dashboard is a quick way to do that, particularly the sending forms to a class group, because Teacher Dashboard automatically creates a group for you. You can also email collaborators via that email collaborators menu under file as well. So I guess the takeaway there is don't get fooled. Send form means you're sending the live form. You're not emailing collaborators to get them to co-edit the form with you. So the other thing that's changed in Google Forms is around where the responses go. And so you can see here that when the user completes the form, the responses go into a spreadsheet. And that's been the way that it's always been. However, there's a lot more flexibility now around what those spreadsheets can do. In fact, you can have multiple spreadsheets if you want to. So here, when you enter the data, so Matt's going to enter some data for us. And we'll just go ahead. We'll talk about the date question in a moment. So he pops in some data. And blah@blah.com, net, or whatever. And then hit submit. And then in a couple of seconds, we'll see that come up, and there it is. So that's coming up into that parent email responses. So that's pretty normal. But a couple of other things, so if we go back to the presentation, a couple of other things to note on the next slide about where our responses go. That when you set up a new form, and we won't do it, but when you go ahead and do it, it actually doesn't name the responses worksheet for you. You've got to go ahead and do that. And if we go back to that, the actual form, you can see under the responses menu here, you can say change response destination, just there. And that's necessary when you start up a new form. You'll be asked to create a new spreadsheet, or if you want to, you can leave the responses in the form itself. But generally, we recommend people create a new spreadsheet and just give the spreadsheet the same name as the form to keep it simple. So that's the default collection option, is just to have the spreadsheet with the same name as the form. But you do need to make sure that you set that response destination up. As I said, their responses in the spreadsheet can also be stored in the same, or the responses spreadsheet, when you do that, is stored in the same folder as your form. So just a few tips to round that out. As I mentioned before, you can also store the responses in the form with the spreadsheet altogether. But generally, you don't want to do that. Generally, you want to have a spreadsheet created and then send your data to the spreadsheet. The other nice feature is that you can also have multiple worksheets in a spreadsheet. So, for instance, if you're collecting data, and I'm not sure, Matt, if you're going to look at something like this later on. Okay, so if you're collecting data over, say, multiple terms or multiple years, you can set up a separate worksheet in the spreadsheet for each term or each year. And that way you can keep that data separate. And you can still use the same form. So one form sending to multiple worksheets on a single spreadsheet. And I've got that point there where you can reuse a form from year to year or term to term by just choosing that new worksheet as a separate response destination. One other last point is that you can toggle accepting responses. So you may want to turn off the form from actually accepting data, which means that when someone tries to fill out the form, they won't actually be able to complete it. So you may want to do that. For instance, you may want to just accept, say, assignment submissions for a particular time frame, and then once the due date of the assignment is finished, you can stop accepting responses, which will stop letting submit responses. So that's just a few tips on storing responses. Any questions on that?
Greg, if you change the destination for responses, it's only the new responses that will go to that new destination. It doesn't transfer the existing one.
Correct. So your responses from previous forms that have been filled out all stay where they were before. And I guess that's the beauty of using this separate worksheet on a spreadsheet, because as far as Google Drive is concerned, it's one file, but you can split that file up into separate worksheets. So you can have, term 1, term 2, term 3, etc. So it's all in the one file, but stored separately on those separate worksheets to keep them separated. So a couple of new question types. So we've got types of data where you can enter dates, and we just saw an example of that. And I think we're going to look at some of these different, or Matt's going to look at some of these different question types. It's very simple. You just insert the question just like you would any other type of question, and it brings up, as it's shown there on the slide, where you can either enter the date, just following the format that's there, or you can select it from a sort of a calendar tool. Very, very kind of common. Most of you, if you filled out a form before, not using Google Sites, or Google Forms, it's very similar to what you'd see in other kinds of forms. And similarly, you can enter the time as well. This time you don't select it, you just enter it, the hours and minutes in AM or PM. So very simple, but some handy new question types. Next one.
Just with time as well, you'll notice a little checkbox there for duration.
Yes.
So if what you're wanting to do is indicate that something is going to take 15 minutes or 30 minutes, you have that option rather than giving a specific time as we have there for what's the time, Mr. Wolf.
So the other things that you can do is include images and videos. So they get set up as almost like separate questions, although they're not questions, but they're separate items in the form. And with images, you can either drag and drop images from your desktop. You can take a picture with the camera, you can get it from your Google Drive or your Picasa web albums, or you can do some kind of Google search. Similarly with videos, you can either add them by doing a search, which does a YouTube search, or you can add it via the URL. So you can copy and paste the URL from YouTube. You can also add a title, and I like how with images you can add some hover text as well. So if you point at the image, it will give you some sort of information about the image. And you can put a caption with the video.
A track for new players with images and videos is I put a YouTube video in the first time, and it was so small and I couldn't work out what was I doing wrong. When you place a video or an image onto the form, you'll notice 4 handles. They're just in the corners. It's just simply a matter of dragging the handles out to resize your image, and then you've got the 3 basic settings of left, centre and right. So you do have some control over that.
Okay, let's keep moving. So this is a really useful addition to Google Forms. It's around data validation. And Matt and I, because we've been doing a lot of work with Teacher Dashboard, we're used to this idea of garbage in, garbage out. Basically, or GIGO, or GIGO. So in other words, you want to prevent, when people are filling out forms, you want to be able to ensure that the data entry conforms to any rules that you might want to set. So for instance, you might want to check for valid email addresses, or give hints at a quiz, or ensure a valid date range, something like that. So this is a really useful thing that I'm pretty sure Matt is going to show a little bit later on, so I won't go into it right now. But data validation is a really cool new feature in Google Forms. And lastly, this is something I've found particularly useful, and that's the ability to copy and paste. That is, you can get a list of values and copy them into one of these 3 question types. That is, where you've got multiple choice, choose from a list, or checkbox questions. So, for instance, one of the forms I use involves all of the schools in the diocese. So that's 150 schools. And the first time I set it up, I literally had to type each school name in, which was, as you can imagine, a royal pain. So, and of course, I had the list elsewhere. I had it in a spreadsheet. So now, if I need to create a list of schools, of those 150 schools, I can simply select down the spreadsheet, you just copy it, you go to the question, get the first question, and then just paste it, and it goes straight down. The list can be from a spreadsheet, a Google Doc, Word, Excel, etc. It can even be tab separated or comment separated lists. So that's a really useful thing. So if you've got a list of choices, and it's like, more than you want to type in individually, you can just copy and paste them into the Google form, which is really useful.
Tool, if you're looking to take paper-based multiple choice quizzes that you might have had, want to turn them into a Google Doc, you've got them in your Word doc, just highlight your alternatives and just paste them in. It saves hours of work.
Yep, very good. Okay. Well, I think that's about it from me. Were there any? Just before I throw over to Matt, were there any other sort of questions about any of the features of Google Forms that you wanted to ask? Maybe some of the new things that have come up recently, some of the new features of Google Forms. All right. Well, without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Matt, who's going to look at some of the ways of using Google Forms in teaching and learning.
So please, at any time, if you've got questions, just turn your mic on and ask them. We're a relatively small group today, so it makes it fairly easy to manage if you do have those questions. So my focus today is really about using forms in education. A number of these forms I already use at my school. others are ideas I've picked up in preparing this presentation. So I can say that most of these do in fact work. So the first one is this idea of gathering email addresses from parents. I've used it simply for my class. As a secondary teacher, I have different classes, and one of the things I've found very effective is being able to email student results and feedback on assessment tasks, not just to the students but to the parents. And I had a rush after parent-teacher night this year of parents wanting this, so I set up a form where they could go in and fill in their email addresses. So it became a very quick way to gather this. I know for some other schools, their SAS database isn't necessarily up to date, so they want to gather current email addresses from parents. So this becomes a quick and easy way to do it. So enables you to gather that for the classroom. The form, the adaptation I've seen of this is where parents have the option to say, yes, I'd like to receive the newsletter electronically, or I prefer to get a paper version, or I'm happy to receive emails about whatever. They're indicating their preference for it. Instead of getting student names, for me, if I'm doing this with my class, because my class list is only 25 to 30 students long, I will have the student names pre-populated in a drop-down. So once again, it just helps to ensure accuracy of the data. So I know that I'm getting the right students there. I asked the date of birth question simply as a way to help validate that it really is the parent, or at least the family, filling in the data on the child. And also, really important with forms. One of the things that I've heard is that schools don't want to use Google Forms because parents don't have accounts. The beauty of filling out the form is they don't have to have an account to fill it out. You don't have to have that login to do it. You've made it freely available to them. They can get in and fill the data out. So that's one use of a Google form. The next one is for student surveys. So this particular example here, and I'll go out to, this is, neither of these are actual live examples, they're a copy of a live example. When the one-to-one program started in high schools, we actually wanted to have an exit survey of our Year 10s, getting feedback from them about the program. And so what we did is we set up a form where, for data validation, we asked them to put in their ID, last name, first name. Once again, for ID purposes, we asked for a street name. Then we set up their classes. And then we just simply asked a whole series of questions. Now, when we set this up, the multiple choice we set up as compulsory questions, and the comments we left as optional. But it was really interesting that the boys, much to the disbelief of many people, a lot of them took the time to fill out the optional comments. And it was a really powerful tool for us because we gathered a lot of data about how the boys viewed the one-to-one program, how they were using their laptops, and enabled us to plan for the future. So the idea is that we're able to gather that student data. The point also is the fact that you don't have to have all questions as required. You can pick and choose whether or not questions are required. It's a checkbox on the form. The other nice thing about these sorts of surveys, rather than the paper-based surveys that we had in the past, is that we can get these beautiful graphics that quickly and simply illustrate the data that you've collected. So second use is for student surveys. No teachers are using this to receive feedback on classes, on topics, on units, many ways that it can be used, not just in high schools but the primaries as well. So we use, at Liverpool, we're using forms for students to do sports selections. Now I will say with this one, if you do go visit this form, those of you that are working from the presentation, do not enter data into this form as this is live. I don't have control of this form, and it's actually up now gathering student sports selections for next year. This process used to be very time consuming when it was paper based. It was time consuming for the classroom teachers, for the students, and more importantly for the sports coordinator. I can remember those days because I used to be the sports coordinator. And it was really hard to work out, have I got responses from all the students? Have I got one response from all the students? Very hard to validate the data that was coming in. Now, it's much simpler for the sports coordinator to gather the data. He just simply now communicates out through the school that sports selections are live from the school website, and the responsibility is with the student. It's not with the pastoral teacher who might have lost the forms, or there's no blame anywhere else. It's now with the student. So I'm a big believer in student responsibility, and use of form has enabled us to do that. So from within the college website, that's a live link. So the students now know, they go to the student zone, it brings up the form which is embedded in the school website. They simply complete that, puts on a little question at the end there just to say, yes, I've checked it, I've confirmed it, the equivalent of their digital signature, and then all that data goes into the spreadsheet, which Chris can then sort and work his magic to do those sports lists. Once again, another great way of getting that information from students.
And Matt, that nice graphic that you've got at the top there, sports selections, etc., that's all one graphic, I gather, with the logo next to the text.
Yep. So this area here, just zoom in. All right, that gives an example there where a graphic has been created and placed in the form. Just makes it just a little bit more presentable rather than just the plain Google form. Any questions before I move on?
Yeah, Matt, I think our sports coordinator, Admira McKillop, would probably be really interested in this. Are you happy to share a copy of your sports selections form to minimise the work for her?
Yeah, I'm more than happy to contact Chris and get him to share it. So
okay, I'll CC you in an email.
Yep, more than happy for that.
Thank
and
you.
The rest of the forms that are up here, if you want to grab copies or whatever, feel free. Anyone, share them around, because that's the beauty of the CloudShare environment. We shouldn't be reinventing each other's work. If it's there, and you're doing it, share it so that people can make use of it. Adapt it. You could be using that for anything. It could be activities week, could be lunchtime activities, whatever. But it's that idea of gathering the data a different way. So, Alma, you had another question?
I've never tried publishing a form as a template, and I was wondering if you know if that's possible to do.
It certainly is, and I don't know if you want to jump out. So you just go File, then New, and then so it says From Template. So
okay, and then upload it as a template.
Yeah, see where it says Submit a Template over on the top, on the far right-hand side?
Yeah.
So that's right. So it's a little bit counterintuitive. You kind of make a new one to submit an existing one.
I've done docs and presentations and stuff, but not forms, so I just wanted to...
Yeah, you can definitely do it.
Okay.
Thanks, Matt.
Okay, next one. In secondary, I know depending on the package you might be using, some of the attendance packages might do class by class, but we certainly don't have that available to us. So for me, in order to maintain my class role, I use a Google form. And with the Google form, I have got it set up so that it's pre-populated with a response. So in this image over here, you can see I've blocked out the names, but you can see they're all marked present. When I open up the form, that's how it appears. They're already marked present. So it makes that marking of the role quicker. To do that, from within the form, you see this idea of get pre-filled URL. So what I'll do is I will come out of this. So I'll go to my parent form. If I go to responses, go to get pre-filled URL, it opens up the form, answer questions that you want pre-filled. So let's say, for example, I don't know why, but I wanted the parent-child, the child's name to always say Fred. Okay, and you'll notice there it's giving me a link. See that link there? So if I copy that link, and I'll just open up a new tab and paste in that link. So if I was to send this form out now, notice Fred is already there. So on my class roll, I've got present pre-populated for all the students, so I don't have to go through every student. I just go, well, who's away today? Mark them absent, and then I can move on. So that way I get the record of my students present very, very quickly. It also enables me to just get that nice visual summary of student attendance patterns within my class. So I find that a very useful tool within my class. Any questions, comments?
Matt, I didn't quite see where you pasted that URL. Whereabouts did you put that URL for the...
I just pasted that into my browser, but you might use that within your site. I know in my site, I've got a class role site, and each page has that pre-populated URL. Another use that I've made use of this year is for marking assessment tasks and providing feedback. So in marking assessment task, I created a form, surprise, surprise, and I was using scale to do this. I entered the student marks using the form, then within the spreadsheet, set up formulae to do whatever it is you want to do with those marks. So to create totals, create grades, I set up formulas to do that. So I would enter in the marks using the form here. And I'll just see if I can call up the form itself for some reason. I'll just push through here. I then used the formula script to enable me then to email the results to parents and students. So what ended up happening was an email was generated. This is just part of the email where the information that I've entered into my marks form was first of all calculated. So this A that's under Area of Assessment 5, that A was generated from the series of marks. I had a formula to say that if the marks were within a particular range, the student would get an A or a B or a C. And so with my feedback, the students got marks in areas 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5, so they got grades. Then they got an overall mark, an overall grade, and the comment. So some of that was what I typed into the form, some of it is calculated in the spreadsheet, but it's all gathered together and sent out as an email to the parents and students, or the parents that wish to receive it. I've got to say it saved me a lot of time, particularly when I came to the second time that I did this with another assessment task, because it was all set up and I just repopulated with a new set of marks. Next one, brainstorming. With this little activity, I'll just zoom in here. Very, very simple form. One question. After looking at the slide under the microscope, describe what you saw. Now, for this activity, I didn't really care if the kids put one word or a sentence. I just wanted to gather their thoughts. And Alma, it could be impressions of an artwork. It could be anything, but it's just gathering that feedback. But that's okay. So what you say? Well, the cool part for me was once I gathered their responses, I simply copied and pasted their responses into Wordle or Tagxedo to produce a word cloud. And so from the word cloud, now we have a discussion in the class about what sorts of words we were using. Some of the discussion, this was a science class, was GUI an appropriate description? Is that the sort of scientific language we want to use? So we could talk about the type of language that might have been used. We could talk about the language that was actually describing what they saw. So a very simple activity, a very, very basic form, but taking the responses, just copy and paste out into, as I said, Tagxedo or Wordle.
I really like how visually appealing this is, and how memorable it will be for the students as well. How quick, it's really quick, and it gives you some information to, like you said, to start a discussion. I don't know, how quick was it to copy and paste those responses into Wordle?
Less than 30, because all you're doing is highlighting the column in your spreadsheet where the data is contained.
Yeah.
Okay, so if I go to the form, and so from the form I go to view responses, and this will take a little bit longer. Alright, so we can go in here, and this is an artificial one that I've just created for this task, but I simply highlight what I want and copy. We go out to Tagxedo, tagxedo.com. From tagxedo.com we simply go create, and we'll just run the Silverlight plugin here. So if you haven't used Tagxedo before, this might look a little bit strange. For those that have used Tagxedo, you know that this is pretty straightforward. So going into class, I would have had this loaded, but here I'm going to go in and go to load, enter my list of words. So there's my pasted list. Okay, we go submit, and here's my graphic created in the background. So you can see it there. So it really is a very quick activity that you can do in real time in class. And then of course, if you want to, you then have the option to do share, save the image, or you can post it up onto the web, all the Tagxedo functions. Okay, does that answer your question?
Thanks. Yeah, thanks, Matt. I was asking because just recently in our curriculum meeting we were talking about building stronger vocabulary that is subject specific, particularly for seniors, and I think it's a really easy way to tap into a range of student abilities and be able to give them a way to refer back to this if you pop it on a Google site or something later.
Yep. And look, it's a little bit off topic, but Tagxedo is a wonderful tool for students to use because they can just copy and paste text out of, say, an electronic textbook. They can put it into Tagxedo, and suddenly they're going to get a visualization of what the common words are within a piece of writing, and so perhaps pick up the theme of what's going on. Because we can now use graphics and video, we can now start to use multimedia stimulus. So in this particular form here, we've got a little response here for Romeo and Juliet. So we'll just open up this form. And so I've just asked, what's the student's name, put in their email address, and so we've got a little video here taken from BBC's Romeo and Juliet. Okay, you won't hear the sound there, I don't think. That's okay. And then down the bottom, we've got question, explain how Shakespeare uses light and dark imagery in this scene to describe the blossoming of Romeo and Juliet's romance. So now the students can type in a response, and this could be a senior piece of work where you may not be wanting just a couple of lines. They could be typing in an extended response. Now, one of the problems, of course, is when they type in the response, it goes into a spreadsheet. But for me with this, where I've used this activity, I've then incorporated, once again, another script called Autocrat. Basically what Autocrat does is it operates like mail merge. What it does is it takes the student response, and it actually creates a doc that you can now go and enter the student response. Now, the nice part about this is that if I go to that form now, so if I go to the live form and I type in my response, this is the live response for the VC. I'm not exactly answering the question. And I come back up here and we'll say that this is Dick's response and this is matt.wells at, and I'm supposed to put in the full email address. Since due. Now I'm not actually doing anything with the email address, so it doesn't matter that it doesn't exist. But when I press submit, that Autocrat script is working in the background. And so now, if I come in here, in a moment, we're going to see a new document pop up, which should be Dick's Romeo and Juliet. Here we go. Dick, Romeo and Juliet, and I can see over here the new response. So when I click on that, so from the form, the student's work has gone into a document, and of course now, as a teacher, I can say make use of, for example, insert comment and provide feedback to the student. The only extra step I would have to do here is I need to go back and share that document with the student. But that is certainly much easier to work with than there. Now that, as I said, that's starting to move into some of the more advanced features. But for me, it's worth spending that time doing that because getting it into the document format, this is the way you would normally see it in the spreadsheet. Very hard to provide feedback to the student there. Okay, so as I said, it's an advanced feature, but my presentation's there for those that want to come back to it. Okay, any questions about that one?
Matt, with that Autocrat, if you had a second question, say under the Romeo and Juliet, would it save it to the same document?
Yes. In fact, I was talking to someone down in the teaching and learning area here, and that's exactly what they're going to be using it for, is gathering 3 or 4 responses from schools and then compiling it into one document for the school. Okay, the next one. This is deliberately left this to one of the later ones because often this is the first thing teachers think of when they start using forms, or the first example. And that is using online exams, online quizzes. And of course, these days, using graphics, the quizzes can be a little more engaging than they used to be. So in this particular quiz, yeah, we've got the student name and email address, a typical multiple choice question. We can ask for short answer. Maths teachers always say, oh yeah, but I can't do equations. Well, it is possible to do equations now. This was prepared using Google document, using the equation edit feature there, and then simply cut, saved as a graphic, and then put in as a graphic, so the student can answer. Here we just have geography style question, done as a multiple choice. And I know these are very low level multiple choice questions, which are simple factual ones. Using once again visual stimulus there with a drop down as the way of selecting the answer, but also being able to use video, so the student can simply, when they're ready, click on the video, play the video, and then be able to answer questions based on the video. In actual fact, this last example is stuff that I'm using internationally now with the education of our referees, that we're moving to this idea of using these visual exams. So it gives you a much more rich environment to set these kind of quizzes. Use it obviously for pre-post tests. And I think the key here is you're not limited to just multiple choice. However, I think multiple choice questions are often given a bad rap. It's not the multiple choice question that's the problem, it's the way the questions get asked. They can be used to test higher order skills, but it does require you to plan those questions. And I provided a link there to a site that actually goes through the process of creating higher order multiple choice questions. If your quiz doesn't contain free response questions, then of course you can then start making use of scripts like Flubaroo and Formule, which are linked here in the presentation, to do self-marking style quizzes. I'm just going to push on to the last two before we just get questions at the end. This idea of data validation. So here we've almost got potentially you could have a teaching module happening here, where the student is watching a video or some other stimulus, and so now the question is being asked, what element number is carbon? So the student presses 8, goes to move on, and they're given a response that says, no, not quite, check the periodic table if you're uncertain. And so until they put the right answer there, they will keep getting that feedback, and of course you could structure that feedback in whatever way you want. But as soon as they enter the right answer, the error messages disappear. So if they go to, once again, perhaps you should rewatch the video, and if they rewatch the video, they would see that the answer is changed, then they can move on. So it's a way of providing that feedback.
What is written in the law? How readest thou?
Oh, right.
Okay. I'm going to get some background noise potentially, so I'm just going to really rush through here. So data validation can be used to prompt students towards finding correct answers to information. Be aware, though, that it can only be used for text, paragraph, text, and checkboxes. You can't use validation with multiple choice questions. And I'll provide a link with some help for data validation.
However, you can use branching from multiple choice questions that can do a kind of data validation where you can send people off to different parts of the form.
Final use, and I use this a lot, and that's getting students to submit work via a form. And in this particular form, I've updated what I'd normally use to include data validation. So the student comes in here, puts their name. They then go and put their email address. Now, what I find a lot of students do is they just go, oh, yeah, my login name, tom.jones. And if I move on there, you'll notice I've got an error message that comes up and says, this must be your Sid Stew School email address. So it's actually prompting them to do that. Then when I ask for a link to submission, I get something like www.google.com, but that's not an actual URL. I want the actual link. So once again, they're being prompted for a full URL. And the beauty of this is, and I've got one there that I can put in and move on, plus also validation that I acknowledge this is my own work and meets criteria of the college, and they actually have to click that in order to be able to go through and submit. So that's really handy, but the great thing is that once they've submitted and we go through to their responses, now instead of having to go off and find their assignments, now it doesn't matter to me how they've done this. It doesn't matter if they're submitting a YouTube video, a Google Doc, a Google Sheet, a Google presentation, a Tagxedo piece of work, anywhere online, they simply submit it through the form. It's just taking a moment to update, but all I do is I can simply click and go straight out to their piece of work. So I don't have to go looking for their work. The data validation ensures that I'm getting the right work from the student, that I'm getting the right information from the student. So that is a few ways, certainly not a complete list, but a few ways that we can use Google Forms within our classroom or within the school.
Mike, anything from you and Phyllis there?
Oh, we just thought it was a good way to submit an assessment task, a quick way to access.
Absolutely. Alma, how did we go over there at Mary MacKillop?
Pretty good. We're just discussing while how we're going to use this in the classroom and share with people.
Fantastic. Well, talking about sharing, we'll be the slides are already shared via that URL that we sent out earlier, and we'll be we're recording this video, so we'll be sharing the video as I did today with the last session. So you'll see that come through in the next week or so. And is that Mary Hill that I can see in the bottom right corner here? Mary,
Yes,
is that you there?
I'm on, but I don't think my camera's working.
Oh, okay, we can see you.
Oh, good.
Were you able to see the presentation and Matt's?
Yes,
Excellent.
I was.
Excellent.
Thank you.
And we've got an empty room. I'm not sure what that is.
That's Reed, is it?
Is that Reed? Ah, Reed.
Hello, Greg. Hi, Matt. Yeah,
We can only see the very top of your head, so we weren't quite sure whether that was you. I don't know if there was anything useful there for you, Reed.
Yeah, good. Yep, thanks.
Okay. And the last person who, I don't know if, we can't hear you. No, we still can't hear you, unfortunately.
Could you hear and see everything? Thumbs up if you could. Fantastic.
Fantastic. Okay. No problem. All right, folks. Well, look, that's, as I said, this is our last, has been our last CloudShare support session for the year. We hope to run them again. Maybe not so right at the end of term, maybe get a bit of a better turnout. We certainly had a huge turnout for the other two. Anyway, we'll wish you all the best for the end of term. We hope that goes well for you, and a peaceful and restful Christmas break. And hopefully we'll see you all again early next year when we kick off these support sessions again. And one last plug, if you haven't got onto Teacher Dashboard yet, get onto Teacher Dashboard. That's what you need to do. And
I'd just like to thank those of you that just gave some feedback. And if you've got any other feedback, please just email it through, because often these sessions, it's a little bit daunting sitting in a room and you don't hear much. It's very hard to see faces. So if you do have any feedback, really appreciate getting that from you.
Okay, folks, all the best.
Yes, Matthew.
See you later, and good luck.
Thanks very much.